David Grant strode through the polished corridors of Los Angeles International Airport, his footsteps deliberate, his expression composed. The bright overhead lights reflected off the glossy floors, casting elongated shadows that flickered beneath him. He had walked these halls countless times before, but today was different. Today, he was not the CEO of Grant Air. He was just another passenger, dressed in dark jeans, a fitted black polo, and a pair of worn sneakers. David blended in seamlessly with the sea of travelers. No tailored suits, no corporate entourage, no VIP greetings, just a man carrying a simple leather duffel bag, observing the world around him. As he approached the VIP check-in counter, he noticed how the staff interacted with passengers. A sharply dressed businessman with a designer suitcase received a warm smile and a polite greeting. Meanwhile, a young woman in a casual hoodie and jeans was met with indifference, her presence barely acknowledged. When David handed over his boarding pass, the woman at the counter glanced at him briefly, her tone flat. "Passport." He passed it over without a word. There was no enthusiasm in her voice, no hint of the customer service values he had worked so hard to instill in his airline. David knew that, as CEO, he was often surrounded by people who told him what he wanted to hear. But the truth? That could only be found in the way his company operated, when no one knew he was watching. With his boarding pass in hand, he walked toward his gate, scanning the terminal as he passed clusters of travelers. A young mother struggled to keep her toddler calm. A group of college students laughed amongst themselves, and a weary businessman rubbed his temples, exhaustion evident on his face. And then, near the VIP boarding line, he saw them. Two flight attendants engaged in casual conversation. One was a woman with a tight blonde bun, her uniform pristine, her posture rigid. Her name tag read Sophie Turner. The other, a brunette with narrowed eyes, was Lisa Bennett. David barely had time to process his observations before Sophie Turner's gaze briefly landed on him. In an instant, he could tell. He was invisible to her. Not an important passenger. Not a priority. Just another face in the crowd. He exhaled slowly, centering himself. "Remember why you're here, David. The truth will always reveal itself when no one knows they're being watched." The first-class cabin of the Grant Air flight was a quiet haven. Plush leather seats, ambient lighting, and the promise of an effortless cross-country journey. David settled into his seat, casually observing the crew's interactions with passengers. A sharply dressed man seated a few rows ahead raised his hand. Within seconds, Sophie Turner was at his side, her voice dripping with sweetness. "Can I get you anything, Richard Caldwell?" she asked, flashing a dazzling smile. "Just a whiskey," he replied, not bothering to look up from his phone. "Of course," she chirped before gliding away. David lifted a hand as Lisa Bennett passed by, signaling for service. She hesitated for a moment before offering a stiff nod. "I'll be with you in a minute," she said curtly. No smile, no warmth. David's jaw tightened slightly. He reminded himself not to react. This wasn't about him. Moments later, he overheard Sophie Turner and Lisa Bennett speaking quietly near the service area. "These VIP seats are wasted on some people," Lisa Bennett muttered. "I know, right?" Sophie Turner replied with a soft chuckle. "I mean, do they even know who owns this airline?" "Probably not," Lisa Bennett scoffed. "That Grant guy. Heard he got lucky with some government contracts. Figures." David felt his pulse quicken, but he remained composed. Their ignorance was staggering. He had spent years building this airline, pouring his sweat and soul into its success. Yet here they were, dismissing both him and the values he had worked so hard to instill. Before he could dwell on his frustration, a voice caught his attention. An elderly black woman, struggling to lift her carry-on bag, looked around for assistance. David was about to stand when a young male flight attendant rushed over, gently helping her stow the luggage in the overhead compartment. "Thank you, young man," she said, her voice warm with gratitude. "You're very welcome, ma'am," he replied with an easy smile. David watched the interaction closely. In the middle of all the disappointing behavior he had witnessed, here was someone who understood what customer service truly meant. By the time the plane touched down smoothly at JFK Airport, David's mind was already racing through the next steps. His assistant had discreetly arranged a meeting with the airline's local management team. Sophie Turner and Lisa Bennett had been summoned as well, though they had no idea why. Inside a sleek conference room near the VIP lounge, David took his place at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. The door opened, and Sophie Turner and Lisa Bennett entered, their conversation lighthearted, completely unaware of what was coming. Sophie Turner offered a polite but detached smile. "Mr. Grant," she greeted, still not recognizing him. Lisa Bennett gave a half-hearted nod. David let the silence settle before speaking. "Let's get right to it. I want to talk about today's flight, particularly the service in the VIP section." The room fell silent. Sophie Turner and Lisa Bennett exchanged puzzled glances. "Wait," Lisa Bennett started, her brow furrowing. "You were on that flight?" "I was." Sophie Turner paled slightly. Lisa Bennett shifted in her chair. David leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "I heard the comments about our passengers. I saw the way you prioritized certain people and ignored others. And I listened as you mocked me, the CEO of the very company you represent." "Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding," Sophie Turner stammered. "There's no misunderstanding," David interrupted. His tone wasn't loud, but it carried undeniable weight. "You made assumptions about who deserves respect based on appearances. And worse, you did it while on duty, representing Grand Air." Lisa Bennett opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. This company was built on the principles of opportunity and respect, and today I watched those values get trampled. Sophie Turner swallowed hard. "Mr. Grant, I didn't realize." "That's the problem," David said sharply. "You didn't realize because you didn't care to look deeper. You saw passengers like me, like that elderly woman, as less important. You assumed our worth based on skin color and social status." The weight of his words settled over the room, like a heavy fog. The managers remained silent, caught between shock and embarrassment. David took a slow breath. "Here's what's going to happen. Effective immediately, the two of you are suspended. We will be implementing a company-wide retraining program on respect, inclusion, and customer service." Lisa Bennett's eyes widened. "Mr. Grant, I've been with this company for years. Doing your best doesn't mean much if it involves discrimination." David cut in. "You'll have the opportunity to reflect on your actions. What you do with that opportunity is up to you." Silence. He stood, signaling that the meeting was over. His assistant approached him. "The press is already asking for a statement." David exhaled. "Tell them the truth. No cover-ups. No excuses." His assistant nodded and stepped away to make calls. Later that evening, David sat in his hotel room, gazing out at the city lights stretching across New York. This wasn't just about an airline. It was about what they stood for. The next morning, David Grant stood at the front of a large conference room filled with Grand Air's executive team and department heads. The tension in the air was thick, each person in attendance well aware of why they were there. David didn't pace. He didn't slam his fists on the table. He simply stood, his presence commanding attention. "Yesterday," he began, his voice steady but firm, "I witnessed something deeply troubling. Two of our employees displayed behavior that contradicts everything this company stands for. But this isn't just about two individuals. This is about a culture we've allowed to fester." Heads nodded slowly around the room. Some executives exchanged wary glances, realizing that the conversation ahead was long overdue. David continued, his eyes sweeping across the room. "Grand Air was built to offer opportunity and respect, especially for those who are often overlooked in society. If we fail to uphold those values, we fail our customers, and we fail ourselves." He let his words settle before taking a step forward. "Starting today, we're launching a full-scale initiative to rebuild trust and accountability." A murmur spread through the room. A few executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but David didn't waver. "We'll be partnering with diversity and inclusion experts to restructure our training programs. This isn't optional, it's mandatory. For every employee. From the top down." A hand hesitantly rose from the middle of the room. "David," a senior executive began carefully, Do you think these measures might be seen as too harsh? David raised an eyebrow. What's harsh, he said evenly, is subjecting passengers to prejudice. What's harsh is allowing employees to think they can act with impunity, treating customers differently based on how they look. The executive swallowed hard and said nothing. We either address this head on, David continued, or we let our reputation crumble. A ripple of agreement spread through the room. No one dared to argue further. David outlined the next steps. Anonymous feedback channels for employees to report bias and misconduct. Monthly performance evaluations focused on ethics and customer service. A recognition and rewards for employees who exemplified the company's values. Lastly, David concluded, we will highlight the people who already represent our vision. People like the young flight attendant from yesterday, the one who helped a struggling passenger without hesitation. A low murmur of approval echoed across the room. David felt something shift. A new momentum. A commitment to change. As the meeting adjourned, several employees approached him, expressing their support for the initiative. David allowed himself a small smile. It was a start. The next few days saw a remarkable shift within Grant Air. Reports of improved customer service began circulating. Employees embraced the new policies. Flight attendants received updated training, and anonymous feedback channels flooded with honest testimonials, some praising the changes, others exposing lingering issues. David kept a close eye on the progress, reviewing updates on training sessions and performance evaluations. The message was clear. Discrimination wouldn't be tolerated. Excellence in service would be rewarded. Meanwhile, news of the incident and David's response spread across social media and mainstream news outlets. Customers shared their experiences. Some praised the company for taking responsibility. Others expressed skepticism. Would Grant Air really follow through? Then a story emerged, one that captured public attention. The young flight attendant who had helped the elderly passenger became a symbol of Grant Air's new direction. A viral post read, while some employees treated passengers differently, one young man stood out. He didn't judge. He didn't hesitate. He just did the right thing. And now, Grant Air is making sure that's the new standard. Let's hold them accountable. The post gained millions of views. People tagged Grant Air. They demanded updates on the company's progress. Grant Air responded. They shared footage of the new training programs. They publicly honored employees who had shown kindness and integrity. They proved their commitment to change. A week later, David Grant stood before a packed press conference. Cameras flashed. Reporters murmured. He adjusted his tie, took a breath, and stepped forward. No company is perfect, he began. And Grant Air is no exception. But we have a responsibility, not just to admit our flaws, but to correct them. He let his words sink in. Respect, empathy, and fairness are not just buzzwords. They are the foundation of Grant Air. We have made mistakes, but we will not hide from them. A reporter raised a hand. Mr. Grant, some people believe this is just damage control. What do you say to that? David didn't hesitate. I say, watch us. The room went silent. Watch how we train our employees. Watch how we elevate those who do the right thing and hold accountable those who don't. Watch how we build an airline where every passenger matters. A slow ripple of applause spread through the audience. David knew it wouldn't be easy. Change never was. But he had started something, and he wouldn't stop now. Later that evening, David booked a new flight. This time, he didn't go undercover. He flew as himself. When he boarded the plane, a flight attendant greeted him warmly. Good evening, Mr. Grant. We're honored to have you on board. He smiled. This time, he felt the difference.